For every famous name in history, there are millions erased, victims of the Atlantic slave trade. Over 4 centuries, at least 12.5 million Africans were forced onto ships bound for the Americas. Nearly 2 million died before reaching land. These aren't just numbers, they're lives, families, cultures, violently interrupted. The Atlantic slave trade was the largest forced oceanic migration in history, a system built on cruelty and profit. Each person had a story, a farmer from Congo, a blacksmith from Oyo, lives reduced to property. The machinery of the trade was designed to erase identity, to turn people into units of labor. How did this system arise? It was built gradually, justified by new ideas about race and hierarchy. European powers, hungry for labor, created vast networks of forts and shipping lanes, while African kingdoms under pressure became entangled in the trade. Wars were fought for captives, communities torn apart, and guns traded for people, fueling endless conflict. Merchants, ship captains, and plantation owners all played their part, viewing people as cargo. The profit motive overshadowed any sense of humanity. The denial of African humanity was not accidental, it was essential to keep the system running. This ideology allowed the brutal engine of slavery to turn for centuries, leaving scars that remain today. To understand the legacy, we must remember the names and stories behind the numbers. The journey into slavery began with violence, raids, kidnappings, and wars deep within Africa. European traders rarely ventured inland. Instead, they built coastal forts and relied on African middlemen, who traded captives for goods like guns and textiles. Captives endured brutal marches to the coast, many dying along the way. Survivors were imprisoned in crowded dungeons, separated from families to break their spirits. Inspections were dehumanizing, bodies checked, teeth examined, skin branded. The transaction was cold, lives bartered for goods, value set by age and strength. Men were prized for labor, women for both work and reproduction. This was a highly organized business, not chaos. European companies like the Royal African Company built forts, financed voyages, and ensured human cargo. The system connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas in a triangle of profit, with people as the primary commodity. The economic might of empires fueled this trade, making it efficient and global. The result, a marketplace where humanity was stripped away, replaced by price tags. The Middle Passage, the sea journey from Africa to the Americas, was a descent into hell. Africans were packed into shipholds, chained in spaces barely large enough to lie down. Disease, starvation, and violence were constant. The air was thick with death. Forced exercise on deck was a mockery of freedom, enforced by the whip. Resistance was met with brutality. Many chose death over bondage. Disease killed more than violence. Dysentery, smallpox, and scurvy swept through the holds. On average, 15% died at sea. Some voyages lost half their human cargo. The Atlantic became a graveyard for nearly 2 million souls. Survivors arrived traumatized, their pasts erased, their futures uncertain. The Middle Passage was not just a journey, it was a crucible of suffering and survival. Surviving the Middle Passage was only the beginning. In the Americas, Africans were held in pens, washed and oiled to hide wounds, then paraded at auction. Families were torn apart, children separated from parents, spouses sold to distant plantations. The auction block symbolized total control, people reduced to merchandise. After sale, the seasoning process began, new names, new languages, brutal labor and harsh discipline. Up to a third died during seasoning, broken by disease, overwork or despair. The goal was to erase African identity and create obedient laborers. Yet the process never fully succeeded. Enslaved people found ways to preserve culture, form communities, and resist. The making of a slave was a violent project, but the human spirit endured. Even in bondage, resilience survived. The Atlantic slave trade fueled a new global economy. European and American wealth was built on enslaved labor, especially for sugar, tobacco, and later, cotton. Sugar plantations were brutal. Most enslaved people survived only 7 to 9 years. The work was relentless, from fields to dangerous boiling houses. Sugar profits enriched European cities and funded the Industrial Revolution. Tobacco and later cotton, thanks to the cotton gin, expanded slavery in the American South. The internal slave trade exploded, moving hundreds of thousands to new plantations. Profits from slave-grown crops built banks, infrastructure, and institutions that still exist. This system created global inequality, draining Africa and enriching the West. The modern world economy was forged in the crucible of slavery. Statistics overwhelm, but personal stories reveal the true cost. Olaudah Equiano's autobiography described his kidnapping, the horrors of the Middle Passage, and his fight for freedom, fueling abolitionist movements. Venture Smith, captured as a boy, endured slavery in New England, eventually buying freedom for himself and his family. His story reminds us slavery was not just a Southern institution. Harriet Jacobs, in Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, exposed the unique horrors faced by enslaved women, including sexual violence and desperate escapes. These narratives counter the cold ledgers of enslavers, restoring names and voices. Enslaved people were not passive, they resisted, dreamed, and fought for dignity. Their testimonies are a legacy of survival. Through their words we see the humanity behind the numbers. Their stories demand to be remembered. Enslaved people resisted in countless ways, from subtle acts to open revolt. Cultural resistance, preserving traditions, music and religion, kept identities alive. Day-to-day sabotage, working slowly, breaking tools, challenged the system. Many ran away, some forming maroon communities that defended their freedom for generations. Violent revolts, though often crushed, struck fear into enslavers and inspired hope. The Haitian Revolution proved that freedom was possible, creating the first Black Republic. Other uprisings, like Nat Turner's, led to harsher laws but also fueled abolitionist movements. Every act of resistance, big or small, was a declaration of humanity. Enslaved people were never just victims, they were agents of change. Their struggle undermined the slave system from within. Resistance was the heartbeat of survival. Abolishing the slave trade and slavery was a long, hard fight. Enlightenment ideals and abolitionist societies in Britain, France, and the US challenged the system. Campaigns, boycotts, and testimonies like Equiano's swayed public opinion. Britain banned the slave trade in 1807, using its navy to enforce the law. The US followed in 1808, but slavery itself persisted. Emancipation required more struggle. Britain abolished slavery in 1833, the US after a bloody civil war in 1865. Brazil was the last in the Americas, ending slavery in 1888. Abolition did not bring equality. Discrimination and exploitation continued. In the US, Jim Crow laws enforced segregation for another century. The end of slavery was not a clean break, but the start of a new struggle for justice. The fight for true freedom continued long after emancipation. The Atlantic slave trade's legacy shapes our world today. The ideology of racism, created to justify slavery, persists in institutions and attitudes. Systemic inequalities, wealth gaps, health disparities, over-policing, are direct inheritances from this past. The economic imbalances between the West and Africa, the underdevelopment of former colonies, all trace back to slavery and exploitation. Political instability in parts of Africa is rooted in the divisions and violence sown by the trade. To understand today's injustices, we must confront this history. The story of the slave trade is one of pain, but also resilience and survival. Acknowledging the past is not about guilt, but about truth and justice. Only by facing these roots can we build a more equitable future. The ghosts of the past remain, urging us to reckon with their legacy.